Three things I have learned in life. Don't trust your evil stepmother, don't play with puzzle boxes, and if you happen to see chains fly through midair, run like hell. Hello YouTubers, today I'm going to be going over a special film on the final cut that's been long overdue, called Hellraiser from 1987. It is directed by Clive Barker, and this was a recommendation from Danny. Thank you, Danny, for the recommendation of Hellraiser. I've been meaning to go over this series for quite some time. I went over the original Friday the 13th, and I've gone over some of the Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street films. But I haven't gone over Pinhead and Hellraiser. This, of course, by Clive Barker, was also based on his novel, The Hellbound Heart. And this was his first film, his first horror film, feature length. He only did 2 short films before doing this, and I must say, as a first feature length film, a horror film, it really is quite an effective and quite a good film. It's a cult film, and over the years of video and DVD releases, it's gotten somewhat of a following. Now, is this horror movie going to be for everybody? No, it's not for the faint of heart, but if you're a die-hard aficionado of the horror genre, you're going to like this film. There are some screwed up things in the film. And, yes, Hellraiser. It's called Hellraiser just like the Ozzy Osbourne song. Originally, it was going to be called Sadomasochist from Beyond, as well as some other titles, before they finally named it Hellraiser. And who stars in Hellraiser and what is it about? Well, Hellraiser stars Andrew Robinson as Larry. You may recognize him as a Scorpio killer in Dirty Harry. Claire Higgins as Julia. Ashley Lawrence as Kirsty Cotton. Sean Chapman as Frank. Oliver Smith as Frank the Monster. And Doug Bradley as the lead Cenobite, Pinhead. Now, what is Hellraiser about? Well, Hellraiser opens up in Morocco with the character of Frank. He ends up obtaining this puzzle box called the Lament Configuration, and it's pretty much a puzzle box from hell. It really is. It then moves to him at his house. He's figuring it out, and then his flesh is ripped to pieces. These chains just arrive out of midair and just tear him apart. From there, it moves on to a couple of months after his disappearance. His brother Larry moves in along with his wife. What Larry doesn't know is that his wife had an affair with his brother Frank. And they move into the house. The beginning of the film does feel a bit slow. We also have Larry's daughter introduced. She's moving there. She doesn't like the stepmother. Her mother passed away when she was younger. So Larry's with his stepwife who had an affair with his brother Frank, and they're moving into the house. He hasn't been there for quite some time. While moving in, we get flashbacks to his wife's affair with Frank, and they're moving the bed upstairs, and Larry cuts his hand on a nail that's on the wall. Severe amounts of blood. Like, there's an incredible amount of blood in that scene, but it lands in the room where Frank died, and that slowly brings him back to life. Julia, Larry's wife, later on finds Frank, and he's not himself. He's very much decomposed, and the blood restores his life. So throughout the film, she is finding victims for him to feed upon, to basically regenerate himself and become the Frank she knew and loved. And that's the story of the film. Larry is unaware that his brother is alive, or should I say regenerating, and Larry's daughter is also a main character in this. We get to see her relationship with the dad, her boyfriend, her work at a pet store, and then eventually she comes across the dark secret of Frank being alive. And from there, we're introduced to these creatures called the Cenobites. Frank wants to regenerate himself and go away with Julia before the Cenobites find him. That nobody has escaped the Lament Configuration, the labyrinth, so to speak. And he's afraid that the Cenobites will find him. The lead Cenobite is Pinhead. He's an iconic horror character. There's Freddy Krueger, there's Jason, there's Michael Myers, and then there's Pinhead from hell. And this film has a very cool mythology. And that's pretty much what the story is about. They have to stop Frank, and Frank needs to regenerate before the Cenobites find him. The effects are top-notch. There's some screwed up stuff in this. It's scary to say the least. And for a first-time filmmaker, Clive Barker does a good job. The crew had some issues with him being a first-time filmmaker. He said himself he couldn't tell the difference between a 10mm to a 35mm lens. But you know, you can't tell he's a first-time filmmaker here. The way they use transitions, the type of shots, you get to see early POV shots. I really haven't seen that since John Carpenter's Halloween or even later horror films. I love how this is set up. It has a nice flow to it. The way they transition scenes, the way they go through actions, simultaneous scenes in juxtaposition. Like when Larry is moving the bed up, we get to see Julia having an affair in a sex scene with Frank. And speaking of that, it's a very romantic film, but also Julia and Frank's relationship in this is really more of a sexual obsession. There's a lot of eroticism in this film and a lot of other layers that you don't really get to see at first glance. And it's not really hidden in some parts. The Cenobites are pretty much some sick S&M figures. I mean, there's a part where they just put in the finger in Kirsty's mouth. And there's something very erotic about that. Yeah, this is some really heavy S&M shit. Probably the craziest S&M shit you're going to see in any movie. But besides that, I like the scares, the build-up, the makeup. There's nothing like 80s practical effects and atmosphere, especially when Frank regenerates his body. And for some of the actors in the US, they had to dub over the voices. I don't know why, but Clive Barker originally wanted this in London. He switched the geography to the United States, and it works somewhat. I like Larry, the dad. Of course, he was a Scorpio killer in Dirty Harry, but he's just kind of oblivious to everything. And then you have Julia and Frank with their affair that they're keeping a secret. And Julia, in many ways, you get to see the sexualization of her character by just luring these people there, killing them for Frank, for her love. And whether or not those motivations are granted or rewarded in the end is something you have to see for yourself. But it definitely does take some turns, and like I said, the beginning is a bit slow, but if you give it a chance after the first 30 minutes, once Frank gets regenerated, once the Cenobites come in, the film really picks up, and the third act is amazing. It's intense, it's suspenseful, and I really like it. It's very, very well done, and one of the better horror movies out there. For a first installment and for a first major horror film by Clive Barker, it's not bad, and I liked his work in Candyman as well as some of his other films. So if I had to give Hellraiser a score, I would give it a 4 out of 5. Again, this horror film is not for everybody, but if you're a horror film aficionado and just like disturbing stuff, you're really going to like this. It does have the usual conventions of an 80s horror film, but there's just other stuff with the eroticism, the type of nature of it, the disturbing imagery that you don't usually get in other horror movies that really makes it stand alone from other horror movies of the time. And Pinhead has such a crazy design there. The actor who plays him, he was kind of disgruntled in post-production because he thought he got along with the actors and they didn't recognize him. Just amazing look for Pinhead. It's just like a crazy pincushion come to life. And the Cenobites, you have that one that kind of like grits its teeth. It's just very scary. Silent Hill definitely had a lot of influence from Hellraiser, you could tell. And yeah, it's just as awesome as the Ozzy Osbourne song Hellraiser. And the chains, those chains are scary when they come into play. The effects are grotesque. This does not pull back any punches. And it has one whopper of an ending, again aiding in Clive Barker's use of transitions. I just love how he transitions this film from scene to scene, and it's just really well done. Hellraiser raises some hell, and it's a good first entry. It later on would end up having 9 sequels, or 9 films total. Yeah, it has quite a legacy, and like any successful horror film, spawns a franchise. And this is very well done. Stephen King had a quote of Clive Barker being the future of horror. He now knows the future of horror, and it lies with Clive Barker. And I must agree, Clive Barker is brilliant with his work in this. Now, there is some changes from the book. In the book, Larry didn't have a daughter. Instead, it was like his ex-girlfriend that kind of got friend-zoned, and she was kind of concerned. And there's been some other changes, but the changes they do make, I like for the film. It really benefits the film on its own. And I would really like to read The Hellbound Heart. I have not read it yet, and it's kind of cool that it's based on a book and the author actually filming it. Clive Barker had other materials that he had a novel from that were made into a movie, and he wasn't quite happy with it, so he decided to direct this himself, and for a low budget, it's quite well done. Even with the other effects towards the end of the film, they ran out of the budget for the effects, so even the ones that don't look as good, you really can't tell because, again, practical effects, in my opinion, go a long way. And Hellraiser is an awesome ride from beginning to end, and it definitely makes the final cut. So if you haven't seen Hellraiser and you can stand gore, you don't mind disturbing stuff, go ahead and check out Hellraiser. It's on Netflix, Amazon, and maybe on demand. It is awesome. At least check out the first 2 or 3 films. And if you have seen Hellraiser, let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. I'm not going to play any puzzle boxes. That was some crazy S&M shit, and that Lament configuration is basically a Rubik's Cube from hell. But yeah, it was cool seeing Pinhead, the effects, and I like Kirsty. The actress does a great job. And yeah, it's a good film for what it is, for a horror film. A cult classic indeed. Just let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. If you like this video, click the like button. Subscribe for more videos. And stay tuned next month for I'm going to be going over the second Hellraiser on the final cut.